bow your heads with me as we offer another prayer. O Lord God, you have told us in your word, you have actually exalted above all things your word. Father in heaven, we have your very words in our hands this morning. You ask us to reverently consider them and to listen to them, and tell us, he who has ears, let him hear. Father, grant that our ears will be clear and attentive this morning to your words, we pray. In Jesus' name. I want to talk to you this morning about the future of religious freedom. When the popular rugby idol Israel Folau shot into the stratosphere his provocative meme, which seemed to condemn homosexuality, he unleashed a firestorm of protest, I think the results of which he could have little anticipated. His meme, as you probably know, was a loose quotation from the Apostle Paul's writing, which among other things specified homosexuality as under the disapproval of Almighty God. The reaction was swift and varied. The public were very quick to say hate speech. Christians, on the other hand, were divided in their opinion about what he had said. Some were delighted that at last somebody was standing up and calling sin by its right name. Others, however, were dismayed that this brief message on Instagram would distort not only the nature of sin, but also the offer of grace that the Scripture encapsulates sin in. Israel's subsequent sacking brought forth a firestorm of discussion about freedom of speech in this country. $4 million was his contract, gone simply because he took the right to say what he believed was true in the world. That particular incident, of course, was only one of a series, perhaps the latest in a series of events in Australian political life and public life, which have been drawing attention to religious freedom and freedom of speech. It started, of course, with the same-sex discussion and the plebiscite that we had a year or two ago, which was followed by the Marriage Amendment Act last year, and finally the Ruddock Review of Religious Freedoms, which was commissioned by Malcolm Turnbull to survey and to look at the state of religious freedom in Australian law, both Commonwealth, state and territory. The Ruddock Review, over a couple of months, got a great many responses, 15,500 responses, concerns about religious freedom in Australia were sent through to the Ruddock Review. Despite that, opinion was very, very divided in Australian public life as to whether or not religious freedom is under threat at the moment. Some people, for example, such as the Uniting Church of Australia, said religious freedom in Australia is in pretty good shape, quote unquote. Other people, however, were very, very concerned. The Australian Executive Council of Australian Jewry, for example, believed and stated, and I'm loosely quoting it here, that there is every indication in Australian public life, as in most other Western countries, that religious freedoms are steadily on the decline. During the week I had the privilege of reading an article by the Professor of Law at Queensland University, the Dean of the Law School at Queensland University. His name is Professor Parkinson, and he outlines what he sees as 4 disturbing trends in Australian society at the moment, which seem to be pointing away from religious freedom in the future. He mentions the proliferation of anti-discrimination law. Those laws which make sure that if you are different, you will be protected. Secondly, he mentions the continuing resistance, in fact a determined resistance to any exemptions from those laws. So that, for example, when a Catholic priest comes up with is confronted by the fact that the law says that nobody is to be discriminated against on the basis of gender, he has a religious belief that says that he, as a religious man, is not allowed to marry. That would need to be protected by an anti-discrimination exemption. And those things are continually resisted in Australian society. Thirdly, he noted also that when we talk about religious freedom in Australia, we have a very diluted view of what it means. Most people, including politicians, think that religious freedom simply means that you have the right to believe and to worship however you think is right. Most people in Australian society do not agree that that means that you also have the right to put into practice what you believe. And fourthly, Professor Parkinson said, there is a disturbing trend toward outright hostility. He uses the word hatred of Christian religion in Australia. He goes on in his article to say that none of these trends are at of sufficient intensity at the moment to cause us trouble. But if they did so, if they did continue, if it did get worse, we would be setting up, he says, the conditions for totalitarianism in the land of the free. I know that you are aware of that sort of thing. But it is so easy in Australian society, so far we are from the rest of the world, to ignore these disturbing trends and to say, it'll be right. And then for Christian people who are aware of the Bible, and particularly of what Bible prophecy says, these trends are in fact disturbing. Do you remember, for example, the words of the prophecy of Revelation 13? I invite you to turn to it with me. Revelation 13. Thank you, Josh, for handing up. Revelation 13. Revelation 13, beginning in verse 11, which simply says that I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. And he exercised all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. the first intimation in this Bible prophecy that we are moving to a worldwide environment of forced worship. He performs in verse 13 great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he has granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, and that the image of the beast should both speak and cause, again, a coercive word, and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Here is a very clear indication that the trickles that we are discerning in Australian society ultimately will become a flood. And if you are reading your newspapers, and I trust you are, if you are watching discerningly the news and not just noticing how many rapes there are or how many breaking and stealing there are, if you are noticing the trends in the world, noticing how many countries there are that are now choosing a totalitarian kind of regime against a liberal democracy, if you are noticing those things, so trust you are, then you will know that we are moving inevitably to that time when religious freedom will be no longer. Revelation 13 is really only a worldwide expansion of an event which is clearly depicted in the Old Testament. Now, I would like with you this morning, for the few minutes that we have, to examine the story in the Old Testament that talks about God's people in the midst of religious coercion. It's found in Daniel chapter 3. And I invite you to turn with me. Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3. This chapter divides itself up quite nicely into 4 headings. Each of them, for the sake of memory, starts with a D. And each of them has 2 points underneath it. So for Dom's sake and for some others' sake in the congregation who like a well-ordered sermon, I trust that this will be a well-ordered sermon. What we will notice here is, first of all, deception. Second of all, dedication. Thirdly, defiance. And fourthly, deliverance. So let's look first of all at deception in this story. This story starts off with a very succinct but very provocative statement. In verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar, it says, the king, made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. The context, the setting of that particular statement is, of course, the previous chapter. The chapter where Nebuchadnezzar is given this magnificent dream of this metal man with these various metals that go down, that deteriorate in value, until finally the whole thing crumbles into the kingdom of God. But you will remember that Nebuchadnezzar has been told that the head of gold represents him. When you read the story of this story in Patriarchs and Prophets and Kings, should I say, you discover that Ellen White suggests that the wise men of the day, noting that Nebuchadnezzar, while he had become very repentant when he was first told about the vision, had drifted away and become proud and arrogant, when they noticed that pride, they approached him and they said, "O king, why don't you build another statue, just like you saw in the vision, and we'll all admire the head of gold?" And he thinks, good idea. But as he thinks about it, he says, no. Not just head of gold. Let's have the whole thing as gold. By so doing, he was wanting to declare publicly, defiantly, what he had come deeply to believe. Is not this great Babylon that I have built? The sentiments of humanism. Everything that is done by the brilliance of human hands. So this great image, golden image, is set up as a symbol of the magnificence of man. But the second aspect of this verse indicates not only that there was a deceptive motive, but that there was a hidden message. Because the image was not only of gold, but you notice its dimensions. It was 60 cubits tall and 6 cubits wide. Now, quite apart from the ridiculousness of a human being, and I'm fairly tall, but I'm not 10 to 1 by any means. I'm not 10 times taller than I am wide. A 10 times taller statue than it is wide is a very long ruler of a statue. It's a ridiculous statue. But that's not quite the point I'm making. You'll notice the centrality of the number 6 here, don't you? 60 tall, 6 wide. That was a very significant number in Babylonian thinking. Babylonian religion was based on that. The Babylonian mathematics was based on that. And today we even have the clock, which is divided into multiples of 6. Do we not? That was the way Babylonians thought in terms of 6. So 6 became the number that symbolised this very humanistic society. And when you think about 6 in biblical terms, you know that 6 is one short of completion, is it not? We don't have a 6-day week of creation, we have 7 days of creation. God created things in 6 days, with the pinnacle being the creation of man, but he did not stop there. He said, I want you to have one day, the 7th day, to reflect on the fact that everything that's made, including you, is made by the genius and the power of the Creator. So 6 symbolises almost, but not quite. It symbolises the humanistic culture that we live in. Do you listen to the radio? Do you read the newspapers? Do you watch the television? Do you get the impression from doing that it is all our doing and that we are actually very clever and that life is fine just with us? We are immersed in a culture that says that human beings are all there is and that's all we need. So there's great significance, you see. This erection of a grave statue which symbolises the enoughness of human beings. We read in the next next verses, Nebuchadnezzar chose a day of dedication for that image. Verse 3b says that he set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the councillors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And so the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the councillors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, apart from everything else, does that strike you as being needlessly repetitive? Is there something rather showy about all of that? Does that point, perhaps, to the manner of dictators in every age, where they depend on a display of power? For example, how much does Soviet Russia depend on its May Day parade of missiles and men? Beijing, the same. We like displays, you see, to show how great we are. And this spirit has even crept into religious life. So we like the big event, we like the lots of music. We think that it's great when there's lots of noise and celebration. Somehow that's powerful. Not only do I notice the particular manner of dictators, but I also notice in the story of the dedication that it emphasises the need to mesmerise the senses in order to make wrong decisions. Verse 4 has the herald crying aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations and languages, that at the time that you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." Seems to me that whenever wrong decisions need to be made, and this was a wrong decision that Nebuchadnezzar knew in his heart to wrong decision, he was asking people to make. But one of the ways of softening us up for that, of making us vulnerable to that, if I can put it that way, is to mesmerise our senses, to have music that delights our senses. I wonder about Christian music sometimes. And when you think about the means by which Adolf Hitler got most of his nation to follow his Nazi principles, where he had these huge Nuremberg rallies with music, with march, to somehow overwhelm the senses and lull them into a sense of this must be right, it's so big. You and I may never darken the stadium of a large celebration, we constantly are exposed to this dulling of our senses, our moral sensibilities, by the screen, the big screen, the little screen, the telephone. Well, folk, our minds, our reasoning powers, our conscience must always be able to make the final decision. We must not allow ourselves to be lulled into a false sense of moral judgment by the mesmerising sound of music. Thirdly, I noticed that, let me just read this next thing. I noticed the defiance is the third thing, with which the story, the defiance of the three Hebrew men. It says in verse 7 that at that time when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp and the lyre, in symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, languages, fell down and worshipped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. All the people. Except three. They're heroes, aren't they? We know them well. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They weren't boys anymore, as they were in the first story in Daniel chapter 1. They were probably only 18 or 19 then. This is probably about 18 years later. They're probably millennials at this stage. In the height of their powers. They're in charge of the province of Babylonia. They have a good job, a great position, everything to live on. But when it came to it, and the music played, three people in that vast stadium remained standing. You remember how the Chaldeans were very jealous of them. Were jealous of the fact that these three Hebrews had been put in positions in Babylon that they thought they ought to have. And so they approached the king and they say in verse 12, there are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. And then it talks about Nebuchadnezzar in verse 13, in a rage and fury, gave command to bring Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. And so they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image which I have set up? Now, he says, if you are ready, I'll give you a second chance. If you are ready, at the time that you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre and psalter, and in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Would have been so easy, would it not? For those three young men, height of their career, future ahead of them, committed to the God of Israel, to say in their minds, look, just a little moment of compromise, nobody will see. We're not going to be much good dead, for goodness sake. We're going to do a lot more good if we live in this kingdom and continue to promulgate the principles of Almighty God in Babylon. It would have been so easy for them to say that, would it not? But Nebuchadnezzar has heightened the stakes. Listen to these things. He says at the end of that challenge, who is the God who will deliver you from my hands. This is not now just a decision. This is about you proving that you do believe in a God who really does deliver people. The clarity of the response is classic. Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this is the case, what you said, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor will we worship the golden image which you have set up. And these young men, in that answer, so clear in the response, so uncompromising with wrongdoing, are a magnificent and very challenging example of us all, are they not? Spurgeon, in his sermon on this particular passage, says this: if an act of sin would increase, I should read it again, if an act of sin would increase my usefulness tenfold, I have no right to do it. And if an act of righteousness would appear likely to destroy all my apparent usefulness, I am to do it. It is yours and mine to do God's will, although the heavens fall, and follow the command of God, whatever the consequences may be. He goes on, that's strong meat, you say? Well, he says, be strong men. Easy. The clarity, the uncompromising commitment to do what God said by these young men is exemplary. It challenges us to the core. You have to ask yourself, so how come these young men would have such a strong character? But have you remembered, my dear friends, that those young men, for the last 18 years, have been following that same principle? Do you remember the fact that in chapter 1, when they were first brought to Babylon, they were given the privilege of all of the king's dainties, of all of the... In fact, I'm going to read it to you because it's such a telling passage of the privileges that these young men were given. Daniel chapter 1. Verse 3, it says that the king instructed Ashpenaz, Daniel chapter 1, verse 3, master of the eunuchs, bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants, and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick to understand. These were clever guys. These were guys with everything ahead of them, were they not? Who had the ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and creature and the literature of the Chaldeans. These guys were set for great things. The king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies, and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king. I want you to notice that that is suggesting, my dear friends, not only that they get the good food that would probably even rival what Michael does. The good food of the kingdom. It wasn't only that. They got the best of the culture. young people, maybe as business people, maybe as ordinary citizens, we are seduced by what? The opportunities that are held out to us in our country. We are seduced into perhaps compromising for the sake of getting ahead. Doing more useful, being more useful some later time. But notice that in verse 8, the Bible says, Daniel and the other three purposed in their heart that they would not defile themselves with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. I take those phrases to mean not simply that they were saying no to the king's table, but they were saying no to the culture's treasures. Ellen White makes a very helpful comment in their little book, Christ Object Lessons. She quotes from that verse in Luke 16 verse 10 where Jesus says, "He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much." The defects, she says, as she goes on, cherished, the defects cherished in dealing with life's minor details pass on into more important things. He acts on the principles to which he has accustomed himself, and thus actions repeated from habits from character, and by the character our destiny for time and for eternity is decided. She says in another sentence, there are no really non-essentials in the Christian's life. These men were able to say what they did in that hour of crisis because consistently they had been making right decisions in all the small duties of life. May the Lord help us to recognise that he that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And finally, we looked at the deception that was involved in that act of worship. We looked at the act of dedication. We looked at the defiance of these young men. I want now finally, as we close, to think about the deliverance that they were offered. You'll know the story, and we need, I think, at this point to hurry on a little bit. But you'll know the story very well, don't you? That they were finally bound, hand and foot, and cast into the fiery furnace. And then he had heated it 7 times hotter. And then it says in verse 24, King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, because he rose in haste and he spoke to his counselors and he said, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fiery furnace? And they answered and they said, True, O king. Look, he said, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. I want you to notice a little philosophy of Christian trial that emerges here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not spared furnace. God does not mostly choose to save us from trouble. He saves us in. I wish that I could learn that truth. No one likes the furnace of affliction, do they? But isn't it the glorious truth that in the furnaces of our affliction, whatever they are, somehow what is burned is not my soul which matters, but the bonds prevent me from walking loose. Not only that, is it not also true that in the furnaces of our affliction is where we truly experience the presence of the Son of God? Is it not true that the moments when Jesus' presence has been most real to you have been those moments when despairing, crying out, you wait in faith and you sense there is someone with you. And the writer says, heaven is the presence of God. If it takes a furnace for us to be able to walk with the Son of God, let's have a furnace, he says. Finally, my dear friends, I want to notice with you that the theme of deliverance, the word deliver, is a key theme in this story. For a very good reason. Because the book of Daniel, this book given to this people to prepare us for the times ahead, is primarily focused on God's promise to deliver. And so the stories of Daniel, which include this story of three friends, and later on about Daniel himself being cast into the burning fiery furnace, are all about God delivering at the moment of deepest darkness. If you read in Daniel chapter 11, right at the very end, you read a prophetic picture of the church of God being plunged into darkness. And that the king of the north, who represents the great enemy of God's people, sweeps over, and there are victories after victories after victories after victories. It says in chapter 12 and verse 1, at that time Michael shall stand up, that great prince which watches over the sons of your people. There will be a time of trouble such as there never was since a nation, even to that time. And at that time your people shall be delivered. Everyone who is found written in the book. The assurance, you see, that we do serve a God who delivers. What's the take-home message for this one? That you and I now are being challenged to prepare for that day. How do we do it? We do it by, in our walk of faith, discovering by actual experience that God delivers. He does deliver. But do you notice from the story we've been just noticing that he doesn't deliver from the furnace? Sometimes it's right into the furnace we have to go. It's the last minute. Let me turn finally with you to the word of reassurance from Revelation chapter 13. Revelation chapter 13. Verse 8. Let this burn into your mind as we close this morning. It says this, speaking about the crisis ahead. The crisis that every intelligent commentator is speaking about today in the newspapers and in the journals. There aren't any journalists of note, commentators of note, who are not saying crisis in the future. They're trying to be optimistic, but they're saying clear as a bell, crisis in the future. And can you and I live our lives as though there is no crisis. But you say, Pastor, what do I do? How do I relate to that? This verse tells us how. It says in verse 8 of Revelation 13, all, please notice the word, all who dwell on the earth will worship him. All. Except, that is, those whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And you and I, in our human confidence, may well say, I won't do it. I'll stand firm for my faith. The Bible says you will not, unless your name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life. But it doesn't just leave it there. It actually gives you more detail on what it means to be written in the Lamb's Book of Life. Notice what it says. It talks in verse 8 about all those who dwell on the earth. And that phrase is in stark contrast to verse 6, which says this: he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell where? In heaven. Here is John the Revelator telling us in succinct language what it means to have your name written in the Lamb's Book of Life. He says that you do not dwell on earth, you dwell in heaven. You say, Pastor, what kind of good is a person who is so heavenly minded there is no earthly use? He isn't talking about that, friends. It's saying that you have come to believe in Jesus as the one in whom your life is hidden. I wish we had time to fold this out. But you know well that the Apostle Paul says in Colossians and Ephesians that you have died. And where is your life? It's hidden with Christ in God. And it's only those who day by day believe that, believe that their real life is in heaven, and choose to copy that real life, believing that their earthly life is dead. Only those will not worship